Hello, everyone, and welcome back to EdPath Coach's video channel here. Today, I am talking with Duane Emery. He's a previous colleague of mine, but we are going to be talking about what it's like to be a parent on this journey and how important it is to have a community, and also hopefully to spread the word that you are not alone if you are a parent at the beginning of this journey, in the middle of this journey, wherever you are, that there are others that have been through it, and you are not the only one. So we're going to dive right into it, and I'm going to start by asking Duane to give his background, talk about his family and his children's journeys, and then we'll get into some specific questions after that.
Yeah, sounds great. Duane Emery. I have two children who are now young adults. I have a son, Ethan, who is 23, and I have a daughter, Zoe, who is 21. I am married, but I'm not married to their mother, and I think that's a key factor in this too. Their mother and I divorced when they were pretty young. Ethan was just over 5 years old when our divorce was finalized, and Zoe would have been 3.5, basically, when that divorce was finalized. And I think that, that played a role in some of their development and some of the things that we might talk about. Been remarried, for 16 years now. So most of their lives they've known, my wife as their stepmother, and have been actively involved. And, we split custody for a long time, but now both kids live with us. And that kind of plays into all this as well, quite frankly. And we may come back around to that. They attended public schools. Actually, they started out at a private school here in town, and then because of us living in different communities and it being downtown, that kind of didn't work over the long term. So then they ended up in public schools in Zionsville, based upon their mom's address, and then eventually ended up in Hamilton Southeastern schools through junior high. But then I worked at Cathedral High School, and they both started at Cathedral. And interestingly, neither of them finished at Cathedral. And that was interesting because at that time I was the admissions director at Cathedral. So I notified the school of my own children withdrawing, which was unique. And quite frankly, they've both had interesting journeys. My son is actually technically a high school dropout. I don't know if he even used the word technically. He has not gotten his high school diploma, either traditionally or through a GED. And my daughter, who we'll talk about a lot more, is a kiddo who probably could have gone to an Ivy League caliber university, or certainly schools like that, and who ended up getting a high school GED and has started her college journey very recently at Ivy Tech here locally, with aspirations of transferring to IU Indianapolis, and hopefully for her, the Kelly School. It's just been an interesting journey, and one that, has had all kinds of twists and turns. And we'll talk about that. But that's a little background about me and my kiddos.
Yeah, and I think one point is that it didn't look anything like what you thought, right? When they started out at Cathedral, there was no part of you that thought, this is where we're going to end up.
No, not at all. And I'm a first generation college graduate, and I come from a family that quite frankly is a pretty poor family historically. And even working in education, I made a lot more money than most people in my family had ever made. And so I just always assumed that I went to college and kind of broke that cycle of not going to college. And you think about upward mobility socioeconomically and other ways, right? And
Mhm.
I just assumed like my kids would do the same thing, and they clearly have the intelligence to do so. And their levels of intelligence are different. Zoe was pretty early on, pretty clearly more innately gifted academically, but Ethan was a very capable student, has an IQ that would be at about the 95th percentile of intelligence. I mean, so there's not a lack of aptitude or ability there. But they had very different, tastes for school and stuff. Ethan, I knew probably his freshman year of high school probably wasn't going to go to college. He was not going to be a college bound kiddo. And I had to come to grips with that. And then, Zoe's journey is different than I had envisioned it, but I always tried to not put pressure on the kids relative to what they would do. I still tell them to this day, like I don't care what you do for a living. But I want you to utilize the potential that you have, and I want you to be able to support yourselves. And but Zoe and I had conversations at her initiation when she was young about, I mean, she talked to me, I think in third or fourth grade, about going to Stanford. I didn't even know she knew Stanford existed. I mean, I worked in college admissions. I was a college counselor. I know a lot about the college process, and probably don't know as much as I used to, but I was fairly expert in that. And I wasn't talking to my kids about specific schools at that age. And the fact that she was talking about them, and then to see, like in your mind, you think, okay, she's going to be one of these kids we're going to go into a lot of debt for to go to a really big name school, or she's going to get a lot of scholarship dollars at a school that's really very good, but is not quite at that level of selectivity. And she was on her way to that, and then all of a sudden she wasn't. And navigating that has been quite interesting, and has really forced me to think differently about what's important to me, but also to really focus on what's most important for her and for Ethan too.
Mhm. I think that leads well into my next question, which was, how did you balance allowing your children their independence in this process for making their educational choices, but also like providing the necessary guidance and support to help them
I would
grow
say
and
at
be
times,
successful?
yeah, I'd say at times not well. That's the key. Like, give yourself some grace,
Yeah.
and sometimes listen to your kids too. Like I probably thought I was doing it better than I was, and in retrospect, I've had conversations, especially with Zoe, as she's navigated a pretty significant mental health journey, right? Diagnosed more fully than Ethan's. Ethan's had his own mental health journey, but Zoe's has been more diagnosed and more clinically treated and all that. And she's said things to me that have caused me to go, whoa, my perception of that conversation, or my perception of how we just address that topic over time, is obviously very different from her perspective. But I also think her perspective is starting to change as she's gotten to a better spot in terms of her own mental health. So, you just kind of have to understand, like, the perceptions of those conversations can be so different. And I think I do think I did a good job, though, as a parent, of, like, not saying to my kids, you have to go to this kind of school. I mean, I've worked in schools all my adult life, and so I've been around parents, and they've all been private schools. So I've been around parents who, like, you have to do this, and this is the path, and you're going to be you're a pre something, you're a pre med, a pre law, a pre whatever. I've been around that, and I tried not to do that with my kids, and I never would have told them what they could major in, where they could go to school, unless it was just unattainable financially. And I never said, like, to Zoe, you have to get straight A's, you have to, but she felt like I said that, even though I can assure you, I'd never said that. And Ethan would say that, like, he felt like I said he should get straight A's. And I think most of that for him was because his sister was, taking classes that were beyond him, even though they were a grade level apart. And so I think I navigated it fairly well, but I learned a lot. I mean, I am such a better parent today than I was then. And I'm still, I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect parent, and I am far from whatever that ideal, or, that ideal image of a perfect parent might be. But but I do think that I didn't my kids would know that I had a bias towards them going to college, right? Because, I do think that, while I don't think the same way about college that I did, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, I do still think that it is a great way to go, because I think it just increases your options. Like, I think I like the idea of my kids, and any kids, having as many choices in life as possible. And I think college does expand the number of choices, but also I'm smart enough to know that, like I started having conversations with my son about trade schools, even when he didn't want to listen to me about trade schools or anything else in his life. and now what's he doing? He's a plumber who's in it, just finished his second year of plumbing school that is paid for by his employer. I mean, he'll have no cost for his training, and yet he'll make more money than a lot of people who have 4-year degrees and some who have, advanced degrees. And so, and he enjoys what he's doing. So, I think differently about the trades now than I did, back when I worked in college counseling and college admissions. But my kids did always know that like getting advanced education was important and going to college was kind of the presumed path. Um,
Mhm.
and some of that's just because it opened my own world to, it opened my world to not only making more money, but also, I mean, I travel a lot more and I have, I have a much more diverse array of friends and, that just there are so many other benefits to that experience, but also know that it's not for everyone, and especially not always in the traditional, like straight from high school to a 4-year residential university, et cetera. And, that's taken some adjusting on my part, but I've always kind of known it theoretically, and then I started living it.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to normalize that that's not always going to be the space. I think in media and society, we talk so much about you go to high school and then you move right on. You go to have that college experience, right? The 4-year residential, you come out with a major and then you start your career, you go to grad school. And sometimes that's all parents and students see, and they think that's the only way that it goes. And it's so often not. I think now might be a helpful time if you could give an overview of Zoe's kind of journey, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, what her path through her various educational
Yeah, no, yeah,
goals has been.
absolutely. And I talked to her before this too, just to make sure she was comfortable. And she really was pretty comfortable with me sharing about as much as I wanted and needed to share. So Zoe, Zoe was always pretty introverted, incredibly intelligent. School was easy for her academically, but it became increasingly apparent, especially in junior high school, that school was not easy for her socially or emotionally. But it kind of happened all of a sudden. Like we knew she was shy, and then in the middle of seventh grade, like February of seventh grade for her, she just had a meltdown one morning, like at a actually during the weekend at a bridal shower for
Mm.
my niece. Okay, and all of a sudden my wife calls me like something's wrong with Zoe. She's had a meltdown. I can't get her out of the bathroom. But I mean, and all of a sudden that just quickly escalated to her not wanting to or being able to go to school. And I did not handle that well at all. And, some of my worst parenting moments were, trying to literally physically get her out of bed to go to school. And that was probably not the right approach. Um, and, so she missed a lot of school time at the end of seventh grade. She did much better in eighth grade and started out well enough in high school. And then like midway through her freshman year, things started to unravel. We started to miss a lot of school. And that continued. And I finally, in the middle of her freshman year, I guess in February of her freshman year, I allowed her to enroll in online school. And she did that for about a month and a half, and she came to me and said, I need to go back to Cathedral. This isn't, I'm bored. This isn't a good enough school setting, et cetera. And I kind of knew it wouldn't be, but I was like, hey, she needs to go to school. And so she went back to Cathedral, finished her freshman year, did some catch up work there during the summer, did great. Um, got started her sophomore year, and it just started unraveling again. She ended up enrolling, she ended up unenrolling during her sophomore year, major mental health challenges. Um, and then she started her junior year at Fisher's, and that didn't last long either.
Which
And
is, just for people not from Indiana, a large
yeah,
public high school,
yeah,
big
large.
suburban high school.
But a really good school
Yeah.
too, like
Yes.
a very good school.
Mhm.
And so um but I had concerns, but she had a great counselor, and I mean, they did a lot of things really well. I mean, I'm not this anti-public school guy. I'm a public school grad. I just happen to work in private schools. But she that didn't go like they just like it she had issues that weren't the school's fault, so to speak. Not that it was anybody's fault, but
Yeah.
her issues were much bigger than where she was going to school. And the big issue was that she was going to school and how miserable that experience was for her. And and again, by this time she had been seeing a licensed mental health counselor and this and that. And then, and I knew she was really struggling, but then I did not know. And in full disclosure, in September of what was her junior year of high school, she attempted suicide. And fortunately, she was not successful in that attempt, and it was a big eye opener for like she was pretty immediately grateful that she wasn't successful.
Mhm.
She, to my knowledge, has not been a repeat attempter, and we've spent thousands of dollars and many hours, and we've spent a lot. We've invested a lot in different ways in her mental health, and like we were on the verge of having her go to a wilderness program in Utah that would have required me to drain a lot of my retirement, and it was going to be a big amount of money. I mean, we're talking a 50, $60,000 expense. But at this point in time, I'm trying to keep my kiddo alive. So all of a sudden, my focus has shifted from, where's my kid going to go to college and this and that, and to, okay, is my kid going to survive teenage years, and then is my kid going to be able to be a functioning adult, supporting herself, et cetera, as an adult. And then literally less than a week before she was going to go, my father-in-law, who has been hugely beneficial, and we should talk about that at some point. He pulled us aside and said, I don't think you need to do that. And here's why. And then we talked to her mental health counselor, and that counselor put together her own intensive outpatient therapy program that was multiple times a week for an hour and a half each time for multiple weeks, right? And then that with a very different medication regimen, really over the next like year to year and a half, she started to change. And she's a vastly different human being now than she was. This is coming up on 5 years. And if you had said she could be like this in 5 years, I would have said, well, what's it take? How much does it cost, or what does it take to get her to this point? Because we are now at a point where I kind of somewhat envision she could hopefully get to. And I don't mean to ramble, but that's kind of the journey with Zoe. And now she ended up getting her high school GED, because we tried different on like she tried IU online high school. That was the last attempt at school in the traditional sense for her, and it just never worked. And she ended up in cosmetology school, and that didn't work, for different reasons. And then she finally got to the point where she was ready to go to college. And that's when we said, well, we're going to start with Ivy Tech. And she was very good with that. And she will never be that traditional, like she's not going to go somewhere and live in a residence hall. And, if she goes, when she goes beyond Ivy Tech, I'm sure she's going to go either to IU Indianapolis or Ball State. We live on the Northeast side, so she could get to either in about the same amount of time. And so, but she'll probably live at home, and she doesn't, she might get an apartment, but, but it's been a journey, I guess is the right way for me to put it. And I don't mean to ramble, but again, there's a lot to it.
Yeah, no, I think that was good context of how long this process has taken, and that it's not been a straight line,
Nope.
and took longer than you thought. And oftentimes that is the case. And as parents, we have to keep hope that that they're going that keep doing the things that we know are the right things, and keep moving forward, and that they will get to that space and be healthy. But it's going to look a lot different than what we thought it was
Yeah,
going.
I mean, I went from, thinking at one point in time, hey, this is my potential Ivy League kind of kid, or big time scholarships and blah, 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 right? And,
Yeah.
at one point in time, she talked about anesthesiology, and, and that's a pretty lucrative career, all that stuff. and now it's like, hey, I want you to be able to, support yourself as an adult. I'm not going to support you forever. And I want you to be happy with what you're doing. And, I'd love for you to be able to do some optional things, there are needs and wants in life, right? And
Right.
I'll say I want you to be able to meet your needs, but I also want you to not have to worry as much financially as I've seen my family before me in my
Yeah.
younger years have to do. And I just want you to be in a better position than I have been in. And it's interesting because even as she was thinking about starting at Ivy Tech, she became very worried that I'm going to be behind everybody else my age. And I'm like, Zoe, especially at Ivy Tech, you're going to be younger than most of your classmates. But I said,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. Like you're going to get there. And so what if you're, you know, 23 or 24 when you graduate versus 21 or 22? You probably will handle it in a more mature fashion than those younger students, and you'll be actually a little bit better prepared for the real world in some ways. And so again, it's just a different mindset. And
Mhm.
when you literally worry that your child is not going to live from one day to the next, it helps you quickly refocus your priorities, because then your child becomes much more important than what your child is doing. And that, I hope that other people don't have to go through that experience to get to that point. But if you live that journey, your priorities simply change out of necessity. And then you kind of realize, like, look, what's most important is not where my kid goes to college and what they do for a living, but I want them to be happy and be able to support themselves and contribute to society.
Yeah, and I think as parents, that's what we say a lot, right? Like we just want our kids to be happy. But when something like this happens with your child, it has a way of really like making those priorities crystal clear in a way that they sometimes aren't, even though we think that that's the way, like the framework or mindset that we're operating from.
Well, and then it's also the peer pressure that as parents you feel. Like, imagine
Right.
this, like I was still working at Cathedral at the time that my kids, should have been graduating from high school and going to college, should have been, right? And again, it's not a knock on those parents, but the assumption is your kids leaving high school, going to college. So,
Yeah.
it became very painful. Like I don't want to say embarrassing, that it was awkward, but it was here I am, working in education, having been in college admissions. I clearly have been very involved in this. And then to basically say, but my own kid, like my own son, is not even in high school right now, and isn't going to college, let alone graduating from high school. Or my daughter, who you might have known was this really strong student, like she's not in school and she's not going to school right now. And you get asked the question, like, well, where are they going to college? Well, they're actually not. And and
Mhm.
people, it's like everything from like shock and disbelief to quite frankly what is pretty clearly judgment.
Mhm.
And at times I was like, I'm just perceiving this, and at times like, no, that they're pretty much saying it. And you have to deal with that, and you kind of you deal with that within your family and outside of your family. And
Yeah.
and at some point in time you're like, you know what, I just had to get to the point where I don't really care what you think, and I'm happy for you and your child, but I want you to be happy for my child, because my kid will get there. Like I used to say when I was in counseling, God, they all grow up. They, unfortunately, some don't. Like if my daughter had been successful in her attempt, she wouldn't have grown up. And I think about that a lot. But they grow up and they get to where they're going to be as adults. And again, my desire for their path isn't necessarily what their path is going to be and lead to. And but it is the pressure, especially when you're in that environment working, the peer pressure is intense. And it created some real mental health challenges for me that I just had to work through as an adult myself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point for folks that this is a lot for parents and that you should make sure you're taking care of yourself, taking care of your own mental health, giving yourself grace that you're not always going to do everything right. And that it is going to be a lot. It's a lot for one to have to take care of your child and worry about if they're going to be okay. But then at the same time, to have to deal with kind of that external pressure of what other people think about what you're doing or what your child is doing.
Yep.
Uh,
And then also taking care of your spouse and your relationship with your spouse if you
right.
have a spouse, right?
Yeah,
It was a very stressful, trying time in my marriage.
yeah,
There are times still that my wife and I will step back and look at each other like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we're not dealing with that anymore. We deal with different stuff, but parenting has different phases and you deal with
yeah,
different things in each of those phases. But we're so glad we're not dealing with some of that stuff anymore.
yeah. I talk about that in my work with folks about this is a season of parenting, and I think sometimes we lose that in this process because it can feel all consuming. But just like our kids don't wear diapers anymore, at some point they're not going to be dealing with the college admissions process anymore, or they're going to be 25 or 30 and on their own and out doing it. And to remind ourselves that everything ends for better or worse, right?
Yeah.
Like every season of parenting does eventually end. That
Yeah.
helps me right now with my younger children. And I try to remind folks with older children too that it does end. And it
Yeah, and
is.
then you get old people like me who look at you and say, cherish those moments
Yeah.
because at some point in time you're going to miss those, right? And or
Right.
hey, the
It just,
problems you're dealing with now, they're probably going to get a little bit bigger, right? And so
yeah. I,
hopefully they don't get too big, but they certainly change.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about my daughter as a teenager and whew, it's going to be a lot. She's 7 right now, but I just know it's going to be,
Uh,
a lot. Well, I want to circle back around to something you said about support systems, and how it sounds like you've had a lot of different people that have been support systems to you. You mentioned your father-in-law, Zoe's mental health counselor.
mhm.
Um, maybe just speaking to the importance of that or how you would, helping folks that are kind of in this process with like identifying who those people are and how that helped you.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll focus on the support for Zoe first. And,
Yeah.
obviously when things first start happening, the school personnel, the school counselor, et cetera, and we've had varying degrees of quality in that. And most of it's been good to excellent. I wouldn't say we had anybody who was like bad or anything.
Mhm.
But there have been some counselors that have been phenomenal. A couple in particular, at the school in the school setting, right? And
Mhm.
I happened, I was at a school and had access to friends who were counselors and had been a counselor myself. And, so that actually helped some, although that helped me more than it helped her because she didn't want those people that I knew because she didn't want me to know everything. Which is fine. As it should be, right? But, then, she had a one licensed mental health counselor from really, in the spring of seventh grade through like her well, until really, around the time right, probably about the time, a little before she had her suicide attempt. So really, about 3.5 years, I guess, she had one mental health counselor who was really good, but I think they reached a point of kind of they got to the point where they needed to probably change, right? And I just don't think it was working as well at no fault of anyone's. I think it just that relationship ran its course
Yeah.
and Zoe needed something different. She also ended up getting prescribed medication. And quite frankly, that was one of the really poor, like that person prescribed medication to my daughter that she should never have been taking, and I didn't know any better. And I would say if medication's involved, make sure you're talking to multiple physicians about that medication because she was taking a medication that she should not have been taking. And if I were a litigious person, I would maybe have pursued legal action against that person. Although I signed off on it, I just didn't know any better, and that was a shame. So we switched to a different psychiatrist who worked with the new mental health counselor. They worked much closer, even though the first two worked somewhat. We found out they really didn't, um, so she ended up with she has and still has a relationship with the newer, I'm going to say, mental health counselor who's been phenomenal. And then she has an ongoing relationship with the psychiatrist, obviously, because medication is still a part of her life and probably always will be. And so that's been helpful. But then also, I got really lucky. My father-in-law, who is not her biological grandfather, has been remarkable with her, and in ways that I don't think he was with any of his own children, in ways my parents weren't with me, in ways I'm not with her. She wouldn't drive a vehicle, and he finally was the one that, he took her to a lot of her appointments with the mental health counselor when I had to be at work, and that resulted in conversations. And I think, quite frankly, I think my father-in-law saved my daughter's life. I think, had he not been involved in her life the way he was, I think she would have been a repeat attempter, and I think she would have eventually repeated until she was successful. I truly believe that. As much credit as I give the medication and the mental health counselor, I think he saved my daughter's life, and I will get a little emotional about that, because I do think that. And I've told him that, and I've told my wife that. And that was important, but it was also important. It gave my wife and me somebody. He wouldn't tell me everything they talked about, but he would give us good feedback and give us parental advice and stuff based upon it. He would just kind of keep us grounded. And so that was important. So those were the supports in her life. And also, I give her credit. She was smart enough to get herself out of a situation. She was living with her mother half the time, and she came to us. This was before her attempt. It's like 9 months before her attempt, but she knew she needed to get out of that environment because it was toxic, because of her mother and because of my son, who at that time was only living with his mother. And so she was smart enough to know that I can't continue to do what I have to do at that household, because that's part of the reason I have the issues I have. And so, but my father-in-law has been hugely important. And I think, each person in this relationship needs to try to find a support person or a support system. I have two or three very close friends that I could talk to about this. I didn't talk to the world about it, but I talked to two or three really close friends other than my wife, right? And
Yeah.
and my wife had two or three people, and that kind of helped us, as parents, get through that. So you have to be vulnerable to some people, but not to too many people. Like, not everyone needs to take this on.
Yeah, I think that's important to like identify people that can be support systems. Don't try to keep it all to yourself, and try to manage it all on your own for fear of what other people might think. And
Yeah.
know who your people are, right? But be discerning.
Yeah.
And then therapists can be great, and
Yep.
sometimes a switch is needed, and that's okay.
Yep.
Relationships can run their course, or different techniques might be a good option, and so that is okay too. And make sure you're double checking things.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
while I didn't get a therapist of my own, there were times I really came close and probably could have or should have. I didn't, but don't be afraid as a parent to get some professional help for yourself, because you might very well need it. I'm sure there were times when I definitely needed it and I just didn't do it, because I had kind of people who were in that field, who were a part of that two or three person group of myself. I mean, most of the people had a counseling background that I was talking with. But get some professional help for yourself if you need it too, as a parent.
yeah. And also I think it's helpful for us to remind ourselves that our kids need to talk to other adults that aren't us, and them having the other adults in your life who they can talk to and be a support system to them, and also be cluing you in about what's going on, can be immensely helpful for
Mhm.
everybody
Yep.
involved in that space.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
really,
my father-in-law navigated that beautifully. Like, he would tell us enough to keep us from totally bungling it. Yeah, but he would not violate the most sacred of things, that she was sharing with him. Now, obviously, he's not a trained counselor, but if she had said she was going to hurt herself, he would have let us know that, right? But
yeah,
he did a fabulous job, of navigating that for us and for her.
yeah, it's wonderful. Are I assume they're still close now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. What I think that hearing your story has been so helpful, and I hope that parents watching this have learned so many different tidbits and just feel seen in somebody else's space of this journey. And I'm hopefully like, oh, okay, this isn't just me going through this process. What other advice, tips, would you give to parents who are maybe just at the beginning of this process? Maybe they have an eighth grader and they're like staring down navigating high school, or they have a junior, rising junior, and they're just staring down the college admissions process.
Mhm.
Suggestions or tips would you give those parents?
Um, I think first of all, understand that it's your child's journey, not yours, right? Like, don't try to live a life through your child that is not your child's life. And, don't put so much pressure on your kids and be cognizant of the fact that you might be putting pressure on them when you don't think you are, right? Because I'm sure I was. And I probably still am a little bit of denial. Like, I still don't think I put a lot of pressure, but they would probably say I did. Although now that they're getting a little older, they say that you probably weren't pressuring us as much as we told you you were. We just wanted to do what we wanted to do, right? And so,
Uh-huh.
um, but I think too, like know who your partners are in your school setting, like the counselor. You get to know the teachers, right? The teachers see your kiddos more than you see your kiddos, and so
Yeah.
get to know those people and be transparent with them. Like they're not going to judge your kid. They want to help your kiddo. If they don't want to help your kiddo, they should be in a different profession, right? And you can figure out who those people are pretty quickly. But nearly all teachers want to help kids. And so by you partnering with them, they're going to be able to give you information and help support your kiddo in ways that your kiddo won't let you support them. And so know who the network is at school. um find out who your resources are in the community. Like, for instance, like Anne, if I had known, like I don't know if anybody like you existed, and if they did, I didn't know that they existed, not, and certainly not who they were. And it would have been great, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, to have a conversation with someone like you. And this isn't a gratuitous plug, right? Obviously you and I know each other, but uh, you know, that was I you know having somebody who could help navigate and or connect to other people who had lived it, et cetera. Because you there's not a club for parents who have a kid who's a suicide attempt survivor, or the kid who doesn't go to high school for a year and a half leading up to and during and following that time. Like, my daughter hadn't been in school for quite some time before that attempt. And like understanding, uh, just there are people who can help you navigate it. And also just understand that there are all kinds of good options for kids to become productive citizens in this world. And they don't always include traditional college. They don't always include trade school right away. They might mean going, getting a job for a few years, and then, and just be flexible. And I guess I figured out, and I knew it all along, right? But it's harder to live it. I figured out, like, my children being alive and being healthy, and that is so much more important than what they do for a living and how much money they make, and where they go to school, and what I can tell my friends about where they go to school, all that stuff. I mean, um, I always said, like, okay, if you discontinue your education, you get 6 months to live with me, because I'm not supporting you as an adult. If you decide to discontinue education, you've decided to become an adult, and that means you live independently. Well, I've kind of broken that rule a little bit. Um, and I don't know that I would fully break it, but, like, my son is still in school, but he's pretty much a full-time employee who goes to school one day a week. Well, you know what? I don't care if he lives with me for another 2 or 3 years, even a little bit beyond him being in school, because I can't give him a big bunch of money. I'm not
Mhm.
that kind of wealthy. But I can let him live with me, and he's starting to stockpile money that lets him move straight to maybe home ownership instead of rental,
Yeah.
being a renter. And I'm like, okay, so if he lives with me till he's 25 or 26, who cares? Like, it's a few more groceries, it's a little more electricity and water. Even my mindset around some of those things has had to shift. And I think, just don't be so rigid in trying to plan what your child's going to do and or become. And I know it's easier for me to say, and I have a bunch of gray hair. I earned it, right? And um, be flexible. I
Mhm.
guess those are some of the things I'd say, and really know that you're not alone. And with there are some exceptions, right? I mean, unfortunately, suicide is a reality, and successful suicide is a reality. I don't want to, I've come dangerously close to realizing that in my own home, but for the vast majority, they're going to get there. Like they are going to be okay. They may have ongoing mental health challenges, whatever, but they're gonna get there. It just they may not get there in the same time frame that you thought they were going to get there, and that's okay. It really is okay. So be patient, have some hope. Know that you're not alone. Like there are people who live this every day while you think, oh my gosh, nobody I know or nobody else has to deal with this. The reality is people do, unfortunately. And so you're special, but you're not totally unique. uh, and and I'm sure you can help connect people who have shared experiences or similar experiences.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. That not unique. You're special. Like, what did you say? You're special, but not unique.
Yeah, like you're not
I
one
think
of
that
one.
right. That brings me so much peace with like my own struggles that I've had with various things. Like this is not, I'm not the only one going through this. And when I can realize this is part of the human experience or the human condition, it is so comforting. And you said, have hope, be patient, and you're not alone. And I think those are, we can all stay in that space. That'd be a great place for us to
Yeah,
end.
continue to fight for your kid, not
Yeah.
for what others want for your kid, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
fight for your kid, be there for your kid as best you can, and that's going to look different, from what you might have thought it was going to look like, and that's okay. It really is okay.
Yeah. And I think one other point I want to circle back around because I've been in schools as well most of my career is that the school staff is really they want to support you and they can't support you if they don't know what's going on. So use the people in the schools. And to your point, we're all there, 95% of us, because we want to help kids and we can't help them if we don't know what's going on. And no one in the school is going to be judging you, or at
Yeah.
least the ones that are going to be helpful,
Well,
right?
think of this. I mean, my kids have both said to me, and now they understand that this wasn't the way it was. But my kids, their mental state was such that they legitimately thought that when I worked at Cathedral, people were being nice to them and supportive of them only because they were Duane Emery's kids.
Mhm.
And I kept saying to them, no, like this is the way these people are wired. Like they're really good people. And yeah, it doesn't hurt that I'm there, but they're not doing like again, you're not unique. Like I've seen these people do this for years. My kids never got to that realization while they were at Cathedral. And
Yeah.
that's not Cathedral's fault. It's nobody's fault. But I go back to the notion of being divorced, and you think about all the risk factors that come with divorce. And when that happened, I knew my kids were all of a sudden in a different risk category. And some of those worst case risks came became reality for my children. Now some didn't, but some did. And my kids' lack of trusting in adults has been shaped radically by the divorce, but then some other things that have happened, along the way. And not to bash my ex-wife, but most of that's been in that dynamic. And it's created some real trust issues for my kids, and they're just now starting to get to the point where they trust that people are doing things because they want to. For a long time they literally thought that it was because of who I was and how I was connected. I'm like, no, like you see these people over here at this school, they don't even know me and they're doing this. And um so I don't know what the moral of the story is there, but it's interesting when these networks exist. And the reality is schools and parents most often want the same thing.
Yeah.
They want these kids to be happy and healthy and successful, and so that partnership and is incredibly important.
Yes. Yes. And I just want to make sure we hit that home at the end here. Just because I forgot about, I just like, you brought it up. I always, every time I have an interview with somebody, it always helps. I always learn things. And there's always things that I'm like, oh yes, like these are such important information. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. Anything that any closing words or last thoughts before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, you and I have talked about this, before this conversation, but um, just it's still a little bit uncertain, like what all the exact pathways are for the college process for my daughter. I think we're figuring it out. And just understand you're gonna have questions that you can't answer, and I have questions still that I can't answer. And it's it's not as easy as the traditional apply during the fall of your senior year and get admitted, and it's a different journey, and so it's something that I didn't have a lot of background in, so I don't feel as expert in. That's still a little bit, it's not as smooth as I'd love for it to be, but at the same time, it's not insurmountable. And but
Mm.
I'd say, if I were to give some advice, like helping people who are now at that point where, okay, what does all this transfer stuff look like?
Yeah.
When you start looking at a place like Ivy Tech Community College to go to a 4 year, we're living that now. So again, in 2 or 3 years, I'll probably be able to give some advice relative to our experience in that. But right now, that's the uncertainty. That's the point of uncertainty. And but again, I've been through so much that I know that it's going to work itself out. I just don't know exactly how it's going to happen.
We'll do a follow-up interview
There you go.
couple years from now, and we'll talk about the transfer process because it is no joke. It
Yeah.
should be easier than it is. And unfortunately, it can often be kind of a maze of figuring out what classes are going to work and what major it is and how all of that goes. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I know that your story will help other folks not feel so alone in this process. So,
Well, I hope so. If I can help one person, that's always was my goal in counseling, and that's kind of still a goal. So if it helps one person, I'm very, very happy with that.
no, I appreciate it. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right. See ya.
Yeah.
Are you gonna